Thank you. When I was young and I'd have questions and I wanted to ask if anyone knows an answer to the question of what I was looking for, I had a set of resources that I could turn to. My friends or my parents or teachers or the library, and these were the kinds of resources that people had used for hundreds of years. Not really that much changed. And then when I went to UC Irvine, I had a new tool. This is not actually a picture of it. The tool was called Melville, but it looked pretty much like this. And it was an online catalog that allowed me to search through all the books in the University of California system. I couldn't search for every word on every page, but I could search through the titles and I could search through some summary information about them. And because I was kind of geeky and I'd be bored, I'd go in and I'd do searches for things like history or love and see how many matches I would get that would come up. And the system would take 10 or 15 minutes, and eventually it would give up. It was just too complicated to come up with all these books in some cases. But still, it was fun that I could actually do that kind of research. When I went to work at the Los Angeles Times, this blurry photo is an example of the kind of tool I inherited there. It was called LexisNexis. It allowed me to search through thousands of newspaper articles and magazine articles from around the world. Advantage to it was that you could get all sorts of great information. The disadvantage was that I had to know certain kinds of search commands to really make it work well. And it was expensive. Now, I wasn't footing the bill, so I didn't care. But most people couldn't afford to use this kind of tool or have access to it. And everything changed when we got the magic search box. It came along around the mid-1990s. And you could enter a search term and get answers back on tools like Yahoo, or you may remember some of these characters out there. And yes, give you a moment to savor some history. Here's a little more history for you, too. And of course, Google came along and grew to be the largest and most popular of the tools of them all. But all of them, you put in a search term, and you would get these answers almost instantaneously. We went from a very short period of time, from those hundreds of years of that very short list of resources I gave you, of being able to ask tens of people, or searching through hundreds of books at a library, or going through thousands of articles at an expensive process, to being able to, anyone, search through millions of web pages of information, and now billions and tens of billions of web pages of information. It was very much a huge search revolution that came along, and it swept through so fast that I feel like we don't really appreciate just how much it transformed the way we seek knowledge and get our answers today. Like many of you, I saw Watson when it was playing Jeopardy, and I was pretty amazed with it. It would come through and answer questions, and it seemed kind of magical, and it even won against the human competitors. But there was a part of me that was also like, but wait a minute. Knowing what I knew about the regular web search engines we used, that in 3 seconds that it took Watson to answer one question, Google would have answered 10,000 questions just in the United States alone. And if you added in all the other search engines such as Bing, and you talked about search engines around the world, including Baidu in China, it's much, much higher rate of questions that were being answered from the search technology. We take it for granted. The real genius behind the search engines isn't just that you had some smart people working in garages and clever engineers figuring out how to get this information, but it was that the information itself was able to be put online, that we went through a printing revolution probably unmatched since we had the printing press, that anybody could publish textual information online for nothing if you wanted to. And it was an important barrier that was broken, and that's what enabled the search that we were able to do today, that the information was being accessible to us in digital form. Another example of what's been going on in terms of these sort of broken barriers is when you talk about book search. Google has probably the largest one that's out there where they have digitized millions of books. And you can do that kind of search I talked about, where you can search for a word and find it on every page if it occurs in the collection that they have. They're not the only ones that have digital books that are out there, but the fact that our books, which were largely dead knowledge, unsearchable knowledge that you had to know if it was in there, have been transformed in this digital collection, that has opened up the ability for us to do book search. YouTube ushered in an era where suddenly we could put video content online very cheaply, for nothing, really. Before we had YouTube and the other services that came along with it, putting video online could be an expensive and technologically hard process for people to do. And now you do it from your camera phone without even thinking about it. And that video content going online is what enabled the ability for us to have video search. You can't search what you don't actually have. And you can do the video search through Google, or you can do video search through any number of other services because the information's available. This is a picture of the Newport Beach Pier, which is just a short distance from where I live. I actually took this picture without having to leave my house at all. I was using Google's map, pulled up the location, and I was able to view it through Google Street View. Microsoft has their own service called StreetSight, and in both cases, the thing that's happening is our real world, our physical world, is being digitally rendered and being placed into a digital archive that we can actually search against. It's yet another important barrier that's been broken, and that's enabling search. And now we're all being digitized at this very moment. You might not realize it. Well, some of you do if you're using services like Facebook or Twitter or other services that are out there. You're sharing what you're thinking about. You're sharing what you're doing. You're sharing who you're friends with. And you're making parts of your lives that were never digital before digital and thus searchable. And it's another barrier that gets broken down. Now, the search engines are using this in some rudimentary forms already. You can do a search out on Google, and if you've connected your account up the right way, if it sees that it has a result that one of your friends has tweeted, it effectively says, hey, take a close look. Someone you know also likes this. Bing does the same thing, where if you hooked your account up with Facebook, you do a search and it says, hey, one of your Facebook friends liked this result. And there's a way of calling out stuff that you may want to pay a special attention to. But what I find most fascinating is that anyone know questioning that I had way back when I was a kid has come full circle through these social networks that allow us to go through and ask our friends. This is what you see out on Twitter. People asking all sorts of questions like, does anybody know this song I heard? Or out on Facebook, people asking questions like, does anybody know a stereo sound system that I should be getting? These are the kinds of things that we used to do in our analog world, and we would do them one at a time. You would talk to a friend that you knew. You talk to another friend that you would do. And that's how you got your questions answered. Search came along, and it was this magical thing that gave us lots of answers right away, and it seemed like we didn't need to perhaps talk to our friends any longer. But now we can go back and we can ask friends or followers or people that we know en masse, and we get answers that come back. Maybe it's not as fast as we get with search, but sometimes it can seem that way. Maybe we don't get answers to everything that we're looking for, but we can always fall back on Google or Bing. And in the cases where we do get answers, it may be answers to those subjective questions where there's no one right fact. What we really want are some opinions from people we trust. Now, I've been covering search for 15 years, before we even had Google, and people were always asking me, well, what's next? What's coming down the line? What's new in search? And the better question is probably, what's the next publishing border to fall? What's the next kind of content that is going to become digital and that is going to go online and thus become searchable for us? And the answer is difficult because some of this may not have even been invented. Who would have thought that 140 characters of whatever you were thinking about would suddenly be something you could post online and then get turned into a searchable resource? And yet it is. And so what may be coming next and what the next publisher barrier is going to be broken down, I don't know. It's yet to be invented. Perhaps somebody in this room may invent it, or somebody watching this video. We'll see how it comes. Thank you very much.